If you've ever wondered how far a family will go for money, let me tell you this. Sometimes the real enemies aren't strangers. They share your last name, your bloodline, and your dinner table. And sometimes they don't wait for you to fall. They wait for someone else to die. The funeral for my grandfather, William Vance, was not a memorial. It was a networking event. That was the truth of it. While I stood beside his open casket, smoothing down the silk tie he insisted on wearing to every board meeting. My parents were 20 feet away, treating their own father's death like a PR opportunity. I leaned over him, straightening that tie one final time, while my mother and father spoke to a local business reporter as if they were promoting a product launch. My mother, Deborah, dabbed at her eyes with a designer handkerchief that cost more than the car I drove every day. "We're just heartbroken," she told the camera, her voice quivering with theatrical precision. "But we have to remain strong for the legacy." Beside her, my father Paul nodded gravely, staring at his wristwatch like morning had a time slot. Meanwhile, I leaned closer to my grandfather's still chest, whispering the goodbye I had been denied at the hospital because I wasn't considered important enough to be put on the approved visitor list. "I'll protect them." "Grandpa," I murmured, resting my palm on the cold fabric of his suit. "The books, the history, you kept your promise. I'll keep mine." That's when I heard my father's voice. He stepped away from the cameras, answered a ringing phone, and lowered his tone, but the chapel was so silent it might as well have been a megaphone. "Don't worry about the old man," he growled into the receiver. "The land is as good as ours. We'll bulldoze that dusty archive on Monday. Developers start Tuesday." My fingers froze. Mid-gesture on my grandfather's tie. They hadn't just waited for him to die. They had already sold his life's legacy, his soul, for demolition. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's part of our community. My name is Scarlett Vance, and if you asked my family, they would tell you I might as well not exist. I lived in the basement of the estate, in a climate-controlled labyrinth called the Vance Archive to outsiders. I was the mysterious granddaughter to my mother. I was our little helper to my father. I was nothing more than a tax write-off. My hours passed in total silence, the scent of aging paper, leather bindings, and antique ink filling the air while I restored manuscripts my grandfather spent 50 years collecting upstairs. My brother Joseph screamed at strangers on the internet while smashing $300 controllers. I sat below, using tweezers to mend a tear in a 17th century map. The workspace was my sanctuary and my cell. The cold dampness of the basement never left my bones. I was not a daughter. I was a tool. I remember the exact moment I realized what I was to them. I was 12. I had spent half a year repairing a first edition of Great Expectations. I learned everything myself, mixing wheat paste, humidifying pages, stitching the binding. When I finally finished, I ran upstairs, bursting with pride. "Look," I said, cradling the book like a newborn. Grandpa said it was beyond saving, but I fixed it. My mother didn't lift her eyes from her phone. She scrolled through photographs from a gala she wanted to attend. My father poured a drink, barely glancing at me. "That's nice, Scarlett," he said, voice flat, eyes fixed on the TV where Joseph played soccer. "Did you hear your brother got a participation trophy today? Coach said he showed real spirit." I stood there holding 6 months of work in my hands, and they didn't even see it. They didn't see the talent. They didn't see the effort. They didn't see me. I was invisible. That was the day I stopped showing them my work. Because in the Vance household, value wasn't measured by brilliance, dedication, or skill. It was measured by volume. Whoever shouted loudest won, and I was quiet. So when I heard my father at the funeral talking about bulldozing the archive, it wasn't just a threat to a building, it was a threat to my entire identity. But I didn't spiral. I didn't cry. Something colder settled inside me. Precise, surgical focus. The same focus I used when hovering a scalpel over a priceless manuscript. Mistakes. Destroy everything. You must be steady. You must be exact. I walked out of that funeral without shedding another tear. I went straight down to the archive, but not to repair anything. I backed up files. I scanned inventories.I photographed every rare volume, every artifact, every map. I catalogued condition, reports, and times. I created digital proof of the entire collection. If they wanted war, they could have it, but they wouldn't be battling the timid, invisible daughter they thought they owned. They would be facing the curator of their downfall. The reading of the will took place the next morning in the Grand Library, a room that always smelled of lemon polish and old money. My parents arrived 20 minutes late, gliding in with a bottle of Dom and 3 crystal flutes. My mother wore black, but cocktail dress black, not mourning-black. My father looked like someone who had already cashed a jackpot check. Joseph drifted in behind them, sunglasses on indoors, scrolling his phone like a zombie. "Let's wrap this up," my father said, flopping into a leather chair and popping the champagne cork. "I've got a meeting with the developers at 2. He poured 3 glasses, handed one to my mother and one to Joseph. He didn't so much as glance at me. I sat apart on a stiff wooden chair, hands folded. I watched them drink. I watched them toast to wealth they hadn't earned. It was almost amusing. In a morbid way, their clothing was decorated with logos, the red soles of my mother's shoes, the oversized Swiss luxury watch on my father's wrist, the designer hoodie on Joseph's chest. They didn't love things. They loved price tags. They surrounded themselves with anything that shouted expensive because they didn't know what valuable meant. Economists call them Veblen goods, items desired simply because they're high. Price signals status. My family was a breathing example of that. They cared nothing for craftsmanship, nothing for legacy, nothing for history, only the ability to say, "We paid more than you," while I had lived my life learning to appreciate the quiet worth of the forgotten, faded and damaged. And looking at the champagne fizzing in their glasses, I felt a strange emotion, pity. They laughed, still unaware that they were toasting the beginning of their own ruin. George Sterling, my grandfather's lawyer, sat at the head of the long oak table, a man carved from hard edges and silence, the kind of man who could scare you without ever raising his voice. He observed my celebrating parents with eyes sharp as flint. He didn't touch the untouched glass of water before him. He simply waited when the last bubble of laughter faded. He opened a slim leather folder and spoke. "If we are quite finished," George said, his voice dry as parchment, "I will proceed with the reading of Thellist Will and Testament of William Van." My father waved a dismissal. "Go on, George. Read the fine print. We know the gist." George didn't link. He looked down at the document. I William Vance, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my final will. He paused, letting Thessalons stretch just long enough to point to my son Paul, his wife Deborah, and my grandson Joseph. I leave thee sum of $1 each. This amount is provided solely to prevent any claims that you were forgotten or overlooked. You were remembered, and you were found. The room went so quiet, I could hear the bubbles popping in their champagne glasses. My father froze, their glass halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile faltered, then vanished. Joseph looked up from his phone for the first time, confused. What? My father whispered. That's a joke, George. That's a sick joke. George ignored him. He turned the page. To my granddaughter, Scarlett Vance, I leave the entirety of the Vance estate, including the coastal fortress, the Vance Shipping Corporation, and the liquid assets and investment holdings, totaling approximately $15 billion. The explosion wasn't immediate. It took a second for the number to sink in. 15 billion. Then the air in the room My father launched himself out of his chair, the champagne glass mashing against the fireplace. Yuli, he screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He was. You manipulated him. That money is mine. It's my birthright. My mother was on her feet, too, shrieking like a bandit. She's a librarian. She lives in the basement. She can't run an empire. She doesn't even know how to dress. Joseph just sat there, mouth open, looking between his parents and men, like he was trying to calculate how this affected his allowance. My father rounded the table, marching toward me. He looked huge, a wall of rage and he slammed his hand down on the table in front of me. Leaning in so close, I could smell the expensive alcohol on his breath. You listen to me? You ungrateful little brat, he spat. You are going to sign that over right now. George has the papers. You're going to sign a transfer of deed, and we're going to forget this ever happened. We'll give you a stipend. We'll let you keep your little books, but the money is ours. He pulled a pen from his pocket and threw it onto the table. It skidded across the wood and hit my hand. Signet, I looked at the pen. Then I looked at my father for 26 years. I had been the quiet one, the obedient one, the one who fixed things. They broke. I had spent my life trying to earn a scrap of their affection, trying to be valuable enough to be seen. But looking at him now, red-faced and desperate, I realized I didn't want Tobe seen by him. I wanted to be free. I stood up. I wasn't tall, but in thought moment, I felt like I filled Therum. I picked up the pen, my father's, triumph flashing in his eyes. He thought he had one. He thought I wore still, the little girl showing him a rested book. I held the pen for a second, feeling its weight. Then I dropped it on the floor. No, I said. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. My father blinked as if I had spoken in a foreign language. What did you say? He whispered. I said no. It repeated, my voice steady. Clinical cold. I won't sign. It's not yours. It never was. The silence that followed was. Then my father's face twisted into something ugly. Get out, Hesnold. If you think you're the heir, then act like it. Get out of my house. Get out of my sight. You are dead to us. Do you hear me, dead? My mother was, her eyes cold and hard. Leave, she hissed, and don't come crawling back when you fail, because you will fail. Scarlett, you always do. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't argue. I walked out of Thelabury, past the shattered champagne glass, past the family that had never been a family. I walked out the front door and into the pouring rain. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, the engine sputtering as I turned the key. I didn't look back at the mansion. I turned Theka toward the coast, toward the one place my grandfather had told me was safe, the fortress. They thought they had exiled me. They didn't realize they had just set me free. The drive to the coastal fortress took 3 hours. The rain lashed against the windshield. A relentless grey curtain that matched the storm inside my head. My father's voice echoed in my ears. Dead to us, but underneath the hurt, underneath Thela conditioning to please them, there was something else. Relief. It was over. The pretending, the hoping. It was all over. The fortress lived up to its name. Perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, it was a massive structure of grey stone and reinforced glass built to withstand hurricanes, and my family called it the money pit Beckers. The upkeep was astronomical and it was too isolated for their so. But as I pulled up to the iron gates, they swung open automatically, sensing the transponder in my car. He drove up the winding path, the ocean crashing against the rocks below. The house wasn't dark. Lights were blazing in every window, warm and golden against the storm. I parked and ran to the massive oak front doors. Before I could even reached for the handle, they opened. Standing there were Arthur and Martha, the estate managers my grandfather had employed for 30 years. Arthur held a large umbrella and Martha was holding a thick wool blanket. Miss Scarlett, Arthur said, his voice steady and kind. We've been expecting you. Martha wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, her hands warm and firm. Come inside, child. The tea is hot and the fire ice. I stepped inside, and the silence of the fortress wrapped around me like an embrace. It didn't smell like Lamontpolish and pretense. It smelled of cedar, sea salt, and old books. The main hall was lined with shelves, Florida to ceiling, filled with the overflow of my grandfather's collection. This wasn't just a house. It was the real archive. My grandfather had been moving the most valuable pieces here for years, right under my parents' noses. He knew, he whispered, looking around. He knew this would happen. Arthur nodded. He knew they would try to sell it all. Miss Hugh wanted to make sure the history served, and he wanted to make sure you survived. That night, I sat in the master study, staring at the fire. On the desk was a framed photo of my family taken 10 years. We were all smiling, or at least pretending to. I looked at my parents. At Joseph's smirk, I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and familiar. Was I stealing their blood? They were my blood. You don't turn your back on family. That's what society titles you. That's what every movie and book says. But then I looked at the photo closer. I saw the way my mother was angling her body away from me. I saw the way my father's hand was on Joseph's shoulder, while I stood a foot apart from everyone else. I thought about the concept of sunk costs. In economics, a sunk cost is a cost that has already been incurred and cannot be recovered. The fallacy is thinking that you should continue investing in something just because you've already put so much into. You hold on to a failing stock back, you bought it high. You stay in a bad marriage because you've already been together 10 years. You try to love your family that abuses you because you've spent 26 years trying to make them love you back. I looked at that photo and I realized that my love for them was a bad. It was a black hole. No matter how much I poured in my time, my talent, my dignity, I would never get error. They were incapable of loving meth way I needed. Continuing to try wasn't loyalty. It was stupidity. It was bad business. I picked up the photo frame and placed it face down on Thetis. Stop the bleeding. I whispered to the empty room. Cut your losses. He wasn't abandoning them. I was liquidating a toxic asset. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving sky a bruised purple. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when the Miss Scarlett, Arthur's voice waist-tight. They're here. I walked to the security monitors. A convoy of black SUVs was idling at the gate. My father was standing outside his car, screaming at the intercom box. Beside him were 4 men in dark suits, private security, and behind them was a man I recognized, Dr. Aris, a psychiatrist known for signing whatever wealthy families deemed to sign. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take me. My father was pointing at the gate. His face twisted. Open this gate, he roared. We have a medical emergency. My daughter isn't. She's a danger to herself. They were going to commit me. They were going to declare me incompetent, lock me away in some high-end facility, and take control of the estate as my... It was brutal. It was efficient. It was exactly what I would have expected. My hands shook just a little. But then I remembered the pen dropping on the table. I remembered the sunk costs. I wasn't their invisible daughter anymore. I was the CEO of my own life. Let them in, Arthur, I say Dinto, the intercom. Open the gates. He stood in the driveway as the SUVs roared up the gravel path. My father jumped out before his car had even fully stopped. Grab her, he shouted to the security guards. Don't let her run. She's having a psychotic break. My mother was right behind him, looking Oh, Scarlett. Honey, please don't fight us. It's for your own good. Dr. Reese is here to help. The guards moved toward me, heavy and menacing. I didn't move. I didn't run. I just waited until they were 10 feet away. Then the front door behind me opened. That's close enough. A voice boomed. My father skidded to a halt. The guards froze. Stepping out of the fortress was George, and beside him stood a tall man with graying hair and a badge on his belt that caught the morning sun. It was Thomas Wright, the state Ateneganero, and my grandfather's oldest friend. Thomas, my father, stammered, the color draining from his face. What are you doing here? This is a private family matter. My daughter isn't well. The Attorney General walked down steps, his eyes cold and hard. Your daughter looks perfectly fine to me. Paul, you, on the other hand, look like Amon, who is about to be indicted. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. For what? Trying to help a sick child. For wire fraud, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. For embezzlement and for grand larceny. He pulled a full document from his jacket pocket. We know about the deal with the developers, Paul. We know you took a $50 million deposit on the fortress land 3 days ago. You sold property you didn't own. You forged a deed transfer. The wire transfer hit your offshore account. That is a federal crime. My father made a noise like a strangled cat. That thought was a misunderstanding. I was acting as the executive. You aren't the executive, George Sterling interrupted, stepping forward with his tablet. And because you have attempted to contest the will and Becca's, you have attempted to harass Thea. I am invoking the poison pill clause, William added to the trust. He tapped the screen of his tablet. Your personal trust funds the ones you Seto, pay for the cars. The clothes, that champagne were conditional on your good behavior. By attacking Scarlett, you have violated those conditions. He turned the screen around so they could see. A progress bar was filling up, transferring assets to the Vance Historical Preservation Society. Transfer complete. No, my mother screamed, lunging for the tablet. Jokant, that's our money. How are we supposed to live? I suggest you get jobs, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. I hear the library is hiring. They need someone to clean Thebes. The police cars arrived a minute later. Sirens wailing. I watched as my father was handcuffed. His expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of shock. My mother was sobbing. Not form, but for her bank account. Joseph wastering to hide behind a car, but the officers found him too. Turns out gambling online with stolen funds is also a crime, as they were shoved into the back of the cruisers. My father looked at me through the window. His eyes were pleading now. Scarlett, Hemeth, family, we're family. I looked at him. I felt the wind off the ocean, cold and clean. I know, I whispered. That's why it had to be this way. 6 months later, the fortress is queer today, but not empty. The main hall has been transformed. The dark, heavy curtains are gone, replaced by off-filtered glass that lets in the light but protects the books. Visitors move through the aisles in hushed reverence. Students, historians, curious locals. It is no longer a private hoard. It is the Vance Museum of History. I stand near the entrance watching a little girl, maybe 7 years old, staring at a display case. Inside is the copy of Great Expectations I restored when I was 12. She presses her nose against the glass. Her eyes. It's so old. She whispers to her mother, but it looks new. That's because Asomione saved it. I say, stepping forward. The girl looks up at me, shy. Someone took the time to fix the broken parts. Did you save it? She asks Ismail. I did. And now I teach other people how to save things, too. I walk over to the window and look out at the... My phone buzzes in my pocket. It's an email from George. The legal proceedings are over. My parents are reserving 5 years for fraud. The debt shave been settled by selling their mansion, their cars, and their watches. I don't feel happy about it, but I don't feel sad either. I feel light. True legacy isn't what you spend. It isn't champagne you drink or the cars you... It's what you save. It's what you... And sometimes the most important thing you have to save is you. If you've ever had to save yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you, share this story. You are the architect of your own worth, and you are never ever invisible.